Okay, cool. So, hello, if you're live, hello, nice to see you. And if you're watching the live recording, nice to see you. My name is Sankalp. I am a neuroscientist. I recently completed my PhD in psychology/neuroscience from the University of Oxford. So, what I am going to do now is talk about human memory. So, I'm starting like a 3-part series on human memory, and today is the first day. And this is my second mega series that I am doing. So it's part of this effort of mine to create these pillar content, is how I phrase it. So we just did one on dopamine, and my view on that is, look, if you want to study anything about dopamine, then that should be your go-to video. Not just if you know me, not just if you like my voice, but if you want to learn about dopamine, period, on the internet. And what I do, which is sort of different perhaps from AI, because now you can just go to AI and ask everything. So what is the human in the loop? Why am I here? And what am I doing? And I think the way I think of it is that my job is the editing. Like there's an infinite amount of information on dopamine, on memory that is available. And my job really is to think about what is the most important of all of this. What do I think everyone needs to know, either from a practical applications perspective, like, the most important takeaway. And I know a lot of you will be interested in neuroscience, but again, there's vast amounts of information on neuroscience. So my job is the editor's job. My job is to present to you things that I think matter, and I think that matter for humans. So that's what I'm doing here. And so even the selection of topics, right? The first thing we talked about is dopamine, and it sort of perfectly coincided with my developing of expertise of dopamine. And today I think what's important is human memory. And the way I'm selecting these topics is, by the way, it has to be a neuroscience topic, of course. Otherwise, I don't know if I'm the one who is saying anything interesting. And so that's one. The second thing would be, is it kind of useful? And the way I sort of judge that is I look at other neuroscientists and other neuroscience influencers who have made videos on topics like that. And then I choose, based on that, which ones might have like a general interest or general applicability. And then the third is just purely my interest. So once I'm done thinking of what could be useful, I think of what is most interesting to me. And memory is one of them. So we're going to talk about that. And just a little bit on the format, what I'm doing here is, while I'm doing the live stream, the way I think about it is that the live stream is a little bit of the behind the scenes. And so if this is behind the scenes, then what is in front of the scenes? And so what is in front of the scene is that this sort of recording will be edited nicely, perhaps with a nice intro. You might have seen it in the dopamine video. I added like a little bit of a cinematic intro, at least made an attempt at that. So with some intro and, edit nicely and put all of these 3 parts together. So the dopamine series was like over 4 hours long or something in total. And then the final version is less than 90 minutes. Or maybe a little bit more than 90 minutes. So there's heavy editing, it's like to the point and so on. And of course, that is after the heavy editing I do in the research process itself. So all of this has taken like decades. Well, years is what I meant to say, decades. I haven't even lived for decades. So we shall do that today. So you should expect me to kind of repeat lines sometimes. I find so the entire video, making the entire video takes like too long, and sometimes it's like, I just want to get this out there. And sometimes I also get early feedback to see how things are doing. So, and if you're here in the live stream, at the end, I might take questions. Well, I will take questions if why not? I don't expect anyone to attend the live streams, to be clear, and it's always a bonus if people do. But my main job here, I'm trying to make a recording, and you're getting to see the behind the scenes of it. And then if you hang out with me for long enough, then we might actually chat. And if not, if no one's attending, then people will watch the recording of either this live stream or watch the recording of the main video when it comes out. So which is to say, to promote, there is a new video that's out on dopamine. And if you haven't seen it, have a look. It's it's pillar content. It's like the best video on the internet. If I had to create one, that's what I've attempted to do. Whether or not I have succeeded is up to you to tell. And of course, there's a lot of things I could improve, and including the production and all of that. But I'm pretty happy with what it is, and I would be pointing to people who want to learn about dopamine exactly in this direction. Okay, dokes. So, then get a sip of water and then we start. Okay. How to sit here is always a bit of a challenge, because if I'm too relaxed, then I'm not alert and not saying good things. And if I'm too alert, then my back starts to hurt, and there's like, this perfect position of the mic. So we shall start. And for those who don't know, we have like a top-down angle, which we will use and soon will use. Okay, let's do this. Okie dokes. Cool. So I'm recording now, and if you're here, enjoy. And if there are any questions, type them out. Hello and welcome to Understanding Emotions. My name is Sankalp. I am a neuroscientist. I recently completed my PhD in psychology/neuroscience from the University of Oxford. And in today's video, we are going to talk about human memory. But before we begin, I want you to know that this episode, this podcast, and in general, what I do on social media, on the internet, is separate from my research role at the university. And this is basically a personal channel. All right. Having said that, in today's episode, we are going to talk about human memory and learning. So when we do things in life, when we want to achieve things, chances are that you want to remember some things, not just because as passive storage, not just as something that, it's good to have like a library of information in your head, but we also make connections. But we also take 2 or 3 pieces of information, pieces of experience, and humans have this remarkable ability to somehow put them together, somehow make these connections and create something that is beautiful, that is innovative, that is mind-blowing, that is awe-inspiring. So think about it as, one of my favorite speeches of all times is Steve Jobs' speech, where he talks about how he learned calligraphy back when he was, I don't think he did school, so back when he was younger. And somehow later when he created the Mac and was thinking of design, somehow all of those calligraphy lessons came into use. Somehow they all informed his decisions and led to this creation of one of the biggest brands, and if you will, one of the most beautiful brands. And it's very hard to replicate all of that, even with something like AI, where, memory is a big challenge. And of course, with time, we are remembering less and less. But still, the art of making connections and making discoveries still seems to be with humans. And look, if AI takes over and remembers everything for us, we will still have to remember who my partner is. I will still have to remember what my relationship history is. So learning and memory, it's not just limited to like these feats of memory where someone has memorized 1,000,000 digits of pi or something, but it is much more functionally useful and much more human than sometimes we give it credit for. It also is something that is so important, and it also is something that neuroscience knows a lot about. So one of the biggest, like neuroscience is a relatively young field, and one of the most progress that it has made is in fact in this field of memory and learning. So last time we talked about dopamine and its relationship to learning, and today we are going to talk about memory. And Nobel Prizes have been won on this. There's a rich neuroscience literature on memory, and it is absolutely mind-blowing. So it's my absolute pleasure and delight that I'm the one speaking to you about this. So this is the structure that we are going to follow for today. Today is going to be largely, so we are going to cover 3 things. First is, let me do that again. So we are going to cover 3 things. The first is, what is memory? we think that we know it. We think that we take things for granted. Like, of course, memory is, that piece of information stored in my brain. Maybe not. And one of the biggest neuroscientific discoveries of our times has been to figure out the fact that memory is not one thing. And then, in fact, there are many, many types of memories. The second thing we are going to talk about is the science. So we're going to talk about the neuroscience of memory. Where in the brain are these pieces of information stored? How does the brain store it? What happens in sleep? What is this idea of memory consolidation? All of that we are going to talk about in the science section. This to me is always mind-blowing, and this is going to be the latest cutting-edge neuroscience that I am pretty confident most of you will not know about. But indeed is very important neuroscience. And finally, we are going to talk about the practices. We're going to talk about how do I enhance my memory, equipped with the knowledge of what is memory and knowing how the science of memory works, which parts of the brain are involved, when does consolidation happen, how do we go from pieces of information to connections, how does assimilation happen? And then, equipped with that knowledge, we're going to talk about practices. And then we're going to talk about evidence-based practices. So not just practices that might be cool, but what are these people who are these memory athletes? How are they remembering these vast swaths of information? Is it just that they have a different brain, or are they implementing specific techniques? Turns out the answer is the latter. So we're going to talk about practices, evidence-based practices to enhance our memory, to improve our learning. And finally, within this, I will also cover things like when memory can create problems for us. So we all know that memory is not just this clinical information storing thing, but oftentimes memory has a lot of, but oftentimes memory has a lot of emotional attachment to us. When we look back, we remember our first beautiful moment with that special someone, or we might remember interactions with our parents or family. We might remember a moment in school, and we might even remember when someone got mad at us. Indeed, on the more difficult side, there are illnesses like PTSD, or its supposedly day-to-day cousin called trauma. And we are going to talk about that as well. What is this relationship between emotion and memory? And how do we look at these emotions? And if something is bothering us, something that has sort of stuck, like in the case of perhaps PTSD or just trauma or some sort of a negative experience in the past, how do we go ahead and deal with it? How do we solve it? And what's the mechanism? What's the science perhaps that is making it happen? So that is what we have in store for you. So today we are going to start with the first section called What is Memory? But before that, let me grab a sip of protein powder. We are now going to talk about what is memory. Now, of course, the intuitive answer might be to think that, memory is this one piece of information or pieces of information that is stored in the brain. And that is kind of true. But it turns out that there are more than one types of memory. There's multiple types of memory. And so what we're going to talk about is how did we discover this fact? And the backstory of this is actually quite phenomenal and perhaps might be one of the most important things that has ever happened in neuroscience. So we're going to talk about this case of this one person, and his name was HM. That's how he's known as in the scientific literature, and that is to protect his identity. Having said that, this person did die few years ago, and so the main name has been revealed, and the name is Henry Molaison, but we're still going to call them HM for the purposes of today's video. And so there's this person called HM Henry, and HM had been young when he was aged 7. He was just walking down the streets, and he unfortunately met with an accident in which he was knocked down by a bicycle. And I think what happened there is he had like a skull fracture as a result of it. And so HM began, while he was okay and he was alive, he began and developed to have minor seizures at the age of 10 and had major seizures by the age of 16. So if you know of epilepsy, if you know of seizures, what happens is temporarily people lose control Depending on the severity of the seizure, they might shake quite uncontrollably sometimes, and it seems very it's quite disturbing to watch also. And it some people confuse it with panic attacks, but that's not what it is. It's more of electrical activity in the brain. So HM began to have major seizures by the age of 16, and these seizures completely robbed him of the ability to function for those periods of time, and also robbed him of the ability to predict when it would happen. And as a result, it was a major quality of life problem for him. And since these seizures were getting so bad, HM tried to consult as many doctors as possible, and he did end up with one of the most eminent neurosurgeons, neurosurgeons of that time. His name was Scoville, and HM was like, help me. And Scoville, the surgeon at that time, he was known for like he was one of the most eminent surgeons because he was known to being bold. He was known to take risks in taking these surgeries, and he seemed to have cured other people of some of their problems through his surgeries. So HM was quite optimistic. And when the surgeon evaluated the case of HM and his history, he suggested a somewhat radical intervention. And this radical intervention was to take out some part of his brain, some part of HM's brain, which seems to be involved, what he thought, in the seizures. So he thought that, look, if I take out this focal point or from where his seizures are originating, then he might be able to cure HM and his seizures, and HM might have a great quality of life after that. So that was the proposal, and it sounds like HM accepted. And so the part of the brain that was removed, so what I'm going to do is on the screen now, I'm going to show you exactly HM's brain and the part of it which was removed. And this is after his death. They were able to look at this thing. And if you are slightly squeamish about seeing the brain, you might want to close your eyes for a bit. You will see. I will tell you when I've stopped showing it, but it's just a human brain. There's no blood. There is nothing too graphic here. So on the screen now, you will see you'll see a brain, and these white regions that are marked ABC, this is where these are the parts of the brain that were taken out. So it may not be obvious just looking at the image. And if you're on audio, I'll try my best to describe what's happening as well. So what has happened here is, what we are seeing is, first of all, a picture of the brain from the bottom up. So the middle part of the brain, which has a lot of like this white middle center, that is what's called the brain stem. And this curly structure behind it is called the cerebellum. And so the markings that we are seeing, the boxes that are drawn around, those are the regions where there should have been brain tissue. So there should have been more folds there, as you see in other parts of the brain. But because of the surgery, these parts were taken out. And you may see some black arrows where there are like specific holes that were pointed. That probably is the mark of the surgery itself. And hopefully you're able to see these parts of the brain that are taken out. And because the brain is so foldy, it might seem quite little, but it's actually quite a lot, quite a big chunk of the brain that was taken out. And this is this part of the brain that were taken out. This is roughly, you could describe it as the medial temporal lobe. And it's just a name, and what's in a name. So that was the surgery. That was the part of HM's brain that was taken out. And the first thing to say after the surgery is that the surgery did seem to work. And this is probably great news, right, for HM. So HM stopped having these seizures, and on the surface, everything seemed fine. After the surgery, also everything seemed fine. And so it for all intents and purposes, this was a successful intervention. Except some strange things began to happen that perhaps no one expected, especially at that time. And one of those things was, HM seems to have lost some memories. Now, this is not the same as he still knew who he was. He still had his sense of identity. He still had his personality was the same. So it's not just, the kind of thing you see in movies that you just have like memory loss and you've just now completely forgotten who you are or what you stood for. That kind of thing rarely happens, by the way, and you'll see as we discuss the science of it why. But HM did seem to have some memory problems. And what were these memory problems? He acted a bit strange. So for example, when after his surgery, when he was in the hospital, if a new person came by and met him, and then he said, hello, hi, nice to meet you, I'm HM, and whatnot. And then if this person went out and if this person came in again, he would introduce himself again to this person as if this were a new person. So as if they had not met. And so seeing some of these symptoms, the surgeon contacted some of the neuroscientists of the time, and one of the PhD students of this eminent neuroscientist, the name I forget right now, he sent one of his PhD students to study HM and see what's happening. And the name of this PhD student, who ended up studying HM for like 5 decades after, her name was Brenda Milner. And some of her discoveries are some of the most profound discoveries made in modern neuroscience. So what was the discovery? So first of all, the same pattern held true with the researcher Milner as well. So when she was studying HM, she visited his house multiple times, and every time that HM saw Milner, he greeted her as if it were the first time they were meeting. And again, this is again to remind you that all of his memories in terms of his distant past and his sense of who he was quite intact. What did change, and this is our first clue that memories are not built the same, is that it seemed like what had happened is that this surgery inhibited his abilities to form new memories. So first hint for us is that the part of the brain that stores memory may not be the same as the part of the brain that forms new memories. And it turns out that indeed, in HM's case, the part of the brain that was responsible for filing new memories was taken away. And you can think of this as the librarian of the brain. Whenever you have a book that comes inside a library, it doesn't go to storage on its own. So a librarian takes it, evaluates it, decides where to keep it, and then goes ahead and stores it. So before it gets permanently stored in the library, there's a bit of the screening phase, a bit of a librarian sort of evaluation phase. And it seems like the part of the brain that does that was taken out in HM's surgeries. And today we know that this part is called the hippocampus. And to be clear, it is not only the hippocampus that was taken out in HM surgery. There was other parts of the brain that were also taken out, which we'll talk later. But one of the most critical parts that was taken out was indeed the hippocampus. Okay. So now something to also say is that, again, it's not, having said that, the case of HM is also not as simple as just, okay, now no more new memories, like a phrase. That was also not the case. He seemed to have many kinds of memories intact. So for example, if you gave him a series of digits to remember, the so-called working memory, like 1, 2, 3, or let's say a phone number, he would not have any problems remembering that. Similarly, he would also not have problems remembering something that was taught to him, like what's called procedural memory. So just to give you an example of that, I have this one star that I've drawn here for you. And one of the tasks that Milner gave HM was showed him this sort of a star. And again, if you're on audio, what I have on screen is a set of stars and concentric stars. So there's one star inside the other. And what Milner gave him was also like a mirror here. So this is a mirror. And so, of course, HM couldn't. So this was like a paper on which these two stars were drawn. There was a mirror. And HM's task was to trace the outline of this star without looking at the star directly. So just look at the reflection of the star and try and sort of trace it out. So what happens is when you start, you are like all over the place. You're not able to like precisely, just through the reflection guide this inside. So you might, like draw like that. And eventually with time, what will happen is that you will learn, and now you are able to sort of trace this star perfectly okay. So this was like a bad representation, but it's also not perhaps the best one. So somewhere in the middle, HM would have done something like this. And then slowly, of course, he would have learned the ability to draw. Except, remember, we were talking about that he doesn't have the ability to remember, right? But he does. So this is what is often called as procedural memory. So there was clearly learning happening. There was clearly some sort of a memorization process happening, but it was not the kind of memory that we think of in terms of people or in terms of information. So this again was another one of our major clues in neuroscience, that memory can be quite different. And indeed, there are different types of memories that are not just these arbitrary distinctions we are drawing, but in fact, they are different types of memories that are supported by different neural pathways, different highways in the brain, if you will. And if you have again watched the dopamine series, you know that dopamine also has different pathways. So this again is our major clue that memory is not one thing. And indeed, we have different types of memories that support different types of learning. So then obviously the question would be, what are the different types of memories? So now obviously the question would be, what are these different types of memories? So I'm going to share with you a series of questions, and I want you to guess whether HM was able to do these tasks. So for example, based on what you know so far, do you think HM could hold a conversation? The answer to that is yes. And that for one reason of that is the researcher was clearly communicating with HM. But the other answer to also is that working memory, as we saw, was pretty much intact. So he was able to hold a literal conversation, right? Could he learn new skills? So for example, drawing things or riding a bike. And again, the answer to that was a yes. His procedural memory systems seem to be intact. Did he remember his childhood? The answer to that is also a yes. And this was our first hint that the storage system is not the same as the filing system. So could he remember meeting you yesterday? That was not the case, because after the surgery, he seemed to have lost the ability to form new memories, right? So these are the words of HM himself. It feels like, quote, walking from a dream. Oh, wait. Retake. So these are some words from HM himself about how his experience was like. It feels like, quote, waking up from a dream. Every day is alone in itself. And this is what Milner, the PhD student who went on studying him for many, many decades, said. There seems to have been any change in HM's capacity to recall remote events anteceding his operations, such as incidents from his early school years, a high school attachment, or jobs he had held in his late teens and early 20s. Right? So it's a bit odd. Okay, I'm gonna do this section again. Yeah, that was a bit odd. So there was no change. So that did not appear. Boom, boom, boom. Yep. Okay, good. Let's do this section again. So here are the words of Brenda Milner, the researcher who studied HM for a number of decades. There did not appear to have been any change in HM's capacity to recall remote events antedating his operations, such as the incidents from his early school years, the high school attachment, or jobs that he had held in his late teens and early 20s. End quote. So what Milner is saying here is that even despite his surgery, all of these memories about himself seem to have been intact. So hopefully this tells you that memory indeed comes in different shapes and forms. And now we're going to talk about what are these different and now we are going to talk about what are these different types of memories and what are these classifications of memory that we think about. So I'm going to pull my whiteboard here for a minute. Hopefully you can see it all right. I have a bit of a lazy leg. Okay. Okay, so what are these different types of memories? Oopsie doops. So what are these different types of memory? So if you look at memory as this umbrella bracket, you can divide it into two types, and you can call these two types could be called as implicit or explicit. So implicit memories are those memories that are somehow inherently but you don't quite actively remember how you remember them. So this is like something like a subpart of it is procedural often, where you're not really able to describe how things are or how do you remember this. So this is like riding a bike. And explicit memories are something that you very explicitly know. So for example, if I ask you what is the capital of France, you would probably be able to tell that. So this is also often the subtypes of explicit memories might be semantic memories. So, what is the capital of France type memories, or they could be episodic, meaning the kinds of episodes that have happened in your life. So who were you growing up? What sort of things did you like? Some sort of like these autobiographical style of memories. And to be clear, procedural could also be sometimes explicit. For example, when you are walking, you should be able to describe how you walk, right? You could step your left foot and then you put your right foot forward and so on. So this is not to say that all procedural memories are implicit, but a good example of implicit memory is riding a bike, which, you don't really know how you do it, but once you get in, you are absolutely fine doing it. So those are like the main types of memory that we think of as in science. And now coming back to the part of the brain discussion. So again, to pull this image of HM's brain again. So there were again multiple parts removed, and it's somewhat of a huge section. And one of the parts that was part of this removal was this part called as the hippocampus. Now, hippocampus, the name I think stands for seahorse in Greek, Latin, I have no clue. But the name stands for seahorse because it's a bit like a coil-like structure. It sort of coils near the bottom, in the middle of, slightly in the bottom, goes slightly towards inside, and that's where you'll see it. Of course, I showed you the image itself where it was. And so these are like two coil-like structures, happen on both sides of the brain, and it's called the hippocampus. And until there was a suspicion that HM's surgery removed the hippocampus, and the hippocampus is the one that's causing all of these memory problems. But so far this was a suspicion because there were many other parts of the brain also removed, right? But then later there was the study by Zola Morgan in 1986, where what they had was a patient who had a bit of a mini stroke in much more localized, meaning much more focused, much more in a smaller regions, which impaired the hippocampus of another patient, RB. So with HM, there was like a larger removal and we had hints about what's going on. But a few decades later, there was another case where this person had a stroke, a small localized stroke in part of the hippocampus. It was not even the whole hippocampus. It was part of the hippocampus called the CA1. And what they found was actually the exact same problem, which is this person lost the ability to form new memories. It's called anterograde amnesia, by the way, which is, like ability to form future memories. And this is when the sort of hypothesis that it is truly the hippocampus that is responsible for all of this was indeed confirmed. So in this sort of line of investigation, now it was pretty well established that the hippocampus is what is responsible for the ability of humans to form new memories, especially memories relating to semantic memories, like facts and those kinds of things. Now, okay, this section is good, by the way. Let me get another sip of water and then we'll slightly switch to a new section. Or at least a newer section. Okay, amazing. So far, this whole stream has been private, believe it or not. Final section, everybody, and then I might talk about meditation for a bit. Okay, what's the next section all about? Let's see. All right, so for the last section, so what has happened, by the way, if you're here live, is I did this stream for a bit, except it was unlisted. It was not public, which is okay, which is all right. There are many people who like the replies, but we're talking about memory today. Already, everyone, you can go back, watch the recording. I think it's some very cool stories. But let's keep on rolling. Okay, dokes, recording. Now, memories are, of course, not just clinical or factual in their nature. Memories have emotions attached to it. They mean something to us. They make our hearts race, or they make us feel love, or they make us feel fear and make us retract within our cocoons. So memories are not just these clinical devoid of any emotion phenomenon. Memories, in fact, are oftentimes quite rich with emotion. So what is happening there? And I would like us to go back to HM and remember how HM had a massive surgical removal of the medial temporal lobe. And indeed, one part of the brain that was removed was the hippocampus, but there were other parts of the brain that were removed. And one of this other part was the amygdala. Now, you may have heard of amygdala, oftentimes called as the fear center of the brain. But the amygdala does much more than fear. In fact, people think that, when we are afraid, that's the job of the amygdala to tell that you are afraid. But no brain region is that easily does just one thing. And so the amygdala is also responsible for happiness. So when you look at happy faces, amygdala is one of the regions that sort of lights up. And so it's more appropriate to think of amygdala as more of an emotion module. And not exclusively that, of course, it also does learning and stuff like that, but it certainly does emotion, and it does face processing and emotional processing in the face, to be more specific. So think of like memories, like think of something that has happened in the past. Think of like a highlight of yours from back in the day. Chances are you're able to remember that just fine. This could be the first major public speaking event that you might have done, first time you were on stage, or perhaps this could be one time where someone really important met you and you just remembered that moment. And of course, these memories are forever etched. Of course, these memories are forever etched in our brains. But if I ask you now to remember what happened 1 week earlier or what happened 2 weeks earlier, perhaps you will have a problem remembering that. And again, this just reinforces the fact that memory indeed has something to do with emotion. And the other part of the brain that was removed in HM surgery was indeed the amygdala. So the fact that there is a relationship between memory and emotion, it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It helps us remember. It helps us remember the joys of life and whatnot. But it can have a darker counterpart. And this is where people might be remembering some sort of a traumatic event. It might be healthy to forget about this event, to move on, to, heal. But oftentimes our brain latches on to such negative experiences from the past and often impairs our ability to be open and to be heartful with people who we meet later. So perhaps someone might have had a negative experience with a romantic partner, and maybe this partner didn't treat them well. And then what might happen is that this person might develop a memory of those sorts of experience, which prevents them from even opening up with someone in the future, because their emotional system might prevent them from being open that way. And as a result, they might not be able to form emotionally healthy connections later on. And this is perhaps a day-to-day example, perhaps more common. And then there are even more uncommon and more extreme examples of memories not being forgotten. For example, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. A lot of war veterans experience this when they go to the battlefield and they are indeed facing some very difficult circumstances, often life and death related. And when they are facing those circumstances, their amygdala is all on and it's all firing, and their memories are being built. But what happens is when they now come back to civilian life, when the war is over or they have been decommissioned, their brain sort of keeps remembering that threat, and they sometimes wake up at night thinking that there might be an attack on them, and it's hard for them to return back to peace times. And this is, I suppose, the more darker sides of the link between emotions and memories. And it turns out that the amygdala has something to do with it. So we're going to talk about the details of what exactly this mechanism is between. So we're going to talk about in detail about how exactly what parts of the brain enable this connection between emotion and memory in the second video in this series. But just to give you a small hint at it today, there was this one experiment done in mice where they electrically stimulated the amygdala, and they found that the rats that were trained, I'm just going to confirm it were rats or mice. Oh boy, I don't know. So in animals, there was electrical stimulation of the amygdala prevented the animal's ability to learn new things. I'm going to do this section again. And so the detailed mechanism of how exactly emotions and memory relate to each other is a topic for the next video, next live stream, next section. So the detailed mechanism of how exactly emotions interact with the memory is the subject for the next section, Today, just to give you a small hint, I want to talk about this experiment where they took rodents. I can't remember, it was mice or rats, but one of them, and they electrically stimulated the amygdala of this animal. And what they found that even after training this mice or rat on this one particular task, when the animal had learned this task, learn whatever the experimenters were trying to teach them, after stimulating the amygdala, the animal sort of lost those memories. And we are going to come back to this in the next section. So what I wanted to discuss today and what I wanted to hammer down today is exactly this. Well, what you're seeing on the screen is HM's surgery, and that's not exactly what I wanted to show. And I wanted to show you this, that memory indeed is not one thing. There is implicit memory and then there is explicit memory. And this sort of a distinction now might seem very obvious and normal, but the fact that the brain might have different modules to store and represent all of this is anything but obvious. And it took neuroscience, one of its most famous patients, for us to learn that lesson. And this patient has taught us about the brain more than any one person ever has, in my understanding at least. So hopefully you understand that memory now comes in different types. And just to summarize, today what we covered is that memory is at the core of us being human. Like without a memory, it's a very bizarre experience to be a human. And the creativity that we produce, the relationships that we maintain, the health that we have, all of it, the learning that we do, all of it is predicated on human memory and our memory systems working well. And so to understand memory, we have to understand what happens in the brain in forming those memories. And we take it for granted that memory might just be one thing, but it is not. And one of what happened in this case, in HM's case, a patient who had seizures, the surgeon removed some critical parts of the brain that we now know have something to do with memory, but at that time was not known. And once this part of the brain was removed, the patient started showing, first of all, their symptoms improved, but started showing weird memory-related symptoms, like not knowing the person that he just met a few minutes ago. But at the same time, paradoxically showed perfect recollection of his past, distant memories, and so on. So this patient gave us the lesson that memory is of different types and might have different connections in the brain. In the next video, we're going to go one step deeper and talk about the mechanisms. We're going to talk about more about what's inside this hippocampus. What happens? How does this hippocampus relate to navigation and space? We're going to talk about the amygdala and the role of emotion in memory processing, and some of the experiments that have been done, which shows how either sonicating or stimulating the amygdala electrically might change our experience of learning, how things like the chemicals that are around, like for example adrenaline or noradrenaline, how those things affect our memory formation, and how in the final video, in the third video, we are going to talk about how do we take this and apply it to our lives so that we remember the things that we want to remember and perhaps have an easier time forgetting the things that we want to forget, if perhaps they are negative memories that are preventing our future abilities to be open and to be open-hearted and to learn new things and whatnot. All right, so that is probably it for today. Let's just check if there's anything else. So the mechanism is for the next video. Some of these mechanisms are some of the most profound discoveries we have ever made in neuroscience. Right from HM to today's neuroscience of the hippocampus has yielded some of the most important, beautiful, elegant findings about the brain. So I highly invite you to watch the next video. Probably will be in a week or so. Okay, I'm going to stop this recording. Yeah, one disadvantage of drinking protein while you do this, you get a lot of burps. I apologize. Okay. So I think this is good enough for today. Join me. I think it's most likely going to be Sunday that I'll record part 2 of this. Maybe 2 Sundays from now. I'm not 100% yet, but I will show up and I will do it. Keep track of this channel, subscribe to the channel, and I want to take this moment to invite you to check out the dopamine videos. So the main dopamine video, the edited version of it was out. Have a look, go to my channel, go to videos, you will find it. It's the latest one, and it's quite cool. It's quite cool, the neuroscience of dopamine and all of that. So hopefully you'll have fun watching and listening to that. But thank you for joining me today for this live stream. Let me know if there's anything about memory that you want to be covered. There's still time. And after the memory bit, I'm going to talk about meditation, create a mega series on that. I've been having a lot of experiences with meditation lately. And been sitting like for hours and hours. So that is something that you might like as well. Can I say something about it? Because it's been so much on my mind. So okay. So what I have been thinking about mostly is the relationship between love and meditation. Okay, boy, are we doing this spontaneous? Very, very spontaneous. And worry not if this will be like a proper video later on, but this is just me sort of let's not use this page because I need these fresh white pages. Let's use these with all the markings. Anyway, so basically what happens is, first of all, people start to think that meditation is about stress reduction. People start to think that, but this is largely speaking a myth. This is largely speaking a myth, and it's not the main point of meditation. Can it help sometimes? Of course, but this is not the main point. So what is the main point? So from here you proceed to something called as wisdom or insights. So what happens is meditation becomes a tool to become wiser. And the reason why that is the case is because you are looking inside your mind and you're trying to understand what is the mechanics of this mind. Like what brings me joy, what brings me sadness, what brings me happiness, and what brings me suffering. And once you look at the mind carefully enough, you will realize the causes and conditions for happiness, causes and conditions for suffering. And so hopefully you do more of the ones that brings you happiness and less of the things that brings you suffering, right? Makes sense. So that's another sort of part of meditation. And then what happens is you're still sort of in day-to-day reality. You're still making discoveries about, oh, if I say truth, then I feel good. If I'm lying, then I feel like I'm contracted and I have to like maintain that lie in my mind. It doesn't feel good. It's stressful, right? So that's like still useful. But then these insights like really, really mature. Like these insights really mature. And then what you do is you start to think about like really deep insights. And so I don't know how to distinguish them. So this would be more like personal insights. So often called as conventional wisdom, conventional. This is the sanctioned word for it. And then there is what are called ultimate insights. So this is helpful, by the way, to talk about all of that, because this will help me when I create the main video on meditation. But so what are these ultimate insights? What are the example of ultimate insights? So the example could be non-self. So the fact that there is no self. And if you're like, whoa, what are you talking about? By the way, this is like a decade of practice. So I don't expect you to necessarily understand these things. And even I am not like fully stabilized in these insights by any means, but definitely had glimpses, let's just say. So non-self, the fact that there is no self here, we falsely create self, and that falsely creates suffering. This is often also known as non-duality. So, when people start and they try to meditate, they think of, let's say the breath, but the image is that, you are someone behind your eyes and you're focusing on the breath and you're sort of looking down, but all of that is just imaginary, right? There's nothing behind your eyes. And so there's no self. There's also like things like impermanence, things are always changing, those kinds of things. These are like the kinds of insights you have. These are when you are meditating. But the thing is, this in itself is also not enough. Like this is super powerful. Don't get me wrong. Some of the most transformative experiences I've had have been with these ultimate insights. But going from here is also something called as love, self-compassion, and compassion. And there are many other things like kindness and so on, which I'm not going to write. And that, to me, has been my major point of inquiry in the last few weeks or so, which is like, how do you go from these insights of non-self, non-duality, which can seem quite dry, by the way, like things are impermanent or there is no self. And all of this can seem a little dry and a little pessimistic. And just on its own, it does seem that. Especially in the beginning when you don't like fully get it, it seems like, oh, everything is impermanent, so let's not think about anything. The thing is not that everything is impermanent. Everything has always been impermanent. And anyway, I'll go into detail about these insights and the way we get them wrong all the time. But the bridge from insights to now living from a place of love or compassion, that has been my main practice, and understanding that has been my main practice. And what has created some breakthroughs for me is when you don't have this notion of the self, when you're not consumed with like, what am I thinking? Who am I? When there's less of that self-obsession, what that does is it frees your attention to focus on others. If I'm too self-obsessed, if I'm thinking about myself, I'm thinking if she likes me or not, or if he took it the way that I want to say it, and if there's that me story going on, then you do not have enough units of attention to give to others. And by the way, in my book, attention is the most basic unit of love. And so when you look at others, you're often in default mode, you're sort of kind of contracted yourself. You're somewhat self-conscious about how it is being taken and if what you're saying is landing in the way it is and whether it's producing the kinds of states that you want it to produce in the other. So for example, if you want them to like you, then you're constantly sort of self-censoring whether what I said was worth it or what I said was met this person's filters enough that they like me back. And when you realize that there is no looker there, that there is no self there to be worried about, it frees up your attention to focus on someone else. And that is love. That's it. Or at least now that you have the attention can now serve the purpose of love, which is, to wish that this person does well and to genuinely wish that this person is free from pain, is free from suffering. And of course, there's no reason why this should stay towards the person in front of you, but this can now extend to first yourself, but it can also extend to like normal people who might just be strangers. And that doesn't again mean that you build a relationship with strangers. That would be too many of them, a few billion of them. But what it means is you can have a positive intention and a positive wish for others, which again is fundamentally what love is. So anyway, those are some of the things I've been thinking about. I'm sure these insights will mature with time as I practice loving in this world and as I practice being in this world and practice living from these place of insights. All of this, by the way, does not mean that there is no room for boundaries. There is no room for being not nice. There's no room for taking your space. All of those things are still super important. And in fact, they're vitally important. Like otherwise, just love without boundaries would just be idiotic. So none of those things are true. And again, in the main video, I'll talk more about that. But hopefully you enjoyed this bit of an interlude here on my experience with practice. And hopefully this was somewhat useful. Anyway, may you be happy, may you be fulfilled, may you live with ease. Thank you for joining me. If you did watch this live stream, I appreciate you. And until next time, where we'll talk about the neuroscience